capitalism dead? One hears a lot of discussion of that question recently. According to a Google search that I did recently, it seems to have been triggered in the first instance by a guy being seen on Wall Street carrying a placard saying, "Capitalism is dead." He was probably standing next to the guy with the placard that said, "The end of the world is at hand." Anyway, this provocation triggered some activity in the media and ultimately even on the opinion pages of the prestigious U.S. newspapers, the New York Times and the Washington Post. As I see it, there are three major factions that are really interested in this question. The first faction is the media, represented by the Times and the Post, and perhaps by myself, since I'm speaking to the question at the moment. The media always like to have a provocative question to kick around for a while. And then there are the people on the far left who have been hoping for a long time that capitalism would die, ever since Karl Marx predicted that it would. And every time there's something that the rest of us think of as bad economic news, these folks are cheered up by the prospect that the end of capitalism is actually at hand. Surprisingly, on the far right, there are people who are also concerned that the end of capitalism is at hand. They, however, are worshiping a pure form of capitalism, which actually never existed in the world, and they begin to worry about the fate of capitalism when something goes slightly wrong and the citizens ask the government for a somewhat less rapacious or hazardous form of capitalism, and the governments start to respond, and that is when the right thinks that capitalism is dying. In fact, there was a column written by a scholar at the Cato Institute, which is a conservative think tank in the U.S., which actually led off with the heading, "Is capitalism dead? Yes," and proceeded to offer an argument. The argument didn't actually prove the point, but nevertheless, that suggests that it's a question that we could take seriously, at least for a while. Now, if this were a cowboy movie and capitalism were the guy in the white hat, you would say that maybe the bad guys have winged him, but he's certainly not dead. On the other hand, in this particular case, it seems more like he shot himself in the foot, but in any case, it's clearly not fatal. Even so, let me play along for a while with the colleague from the Cato Institute and suppose that, in fact, capitalism is dead. What I want to do then is to have a bit of a coroner's inquest here and try to fix the time of death more precisely. Some of the recent comment, of course, has been focused on government actions which created government ownership stakes in financial institutions in the U.S., particularly the insurance giant AIG, to keep them from failing. And according to some commentators, that sort of investment represents government ownership of the means of production, i.e. socialism, and is therefore an indication that capitalism is now dead. Actually, I would be pleased if it turned out that what the government had acquired there was actually the means of production. I actually think that what they acquired was a lot of bad mortgage debt, but that's neither here nor there at the moment. I'm interested in the possibility that the actual death of capitalism occurred at a much earlier date, and I have several candidates for that possibility. In particular, back in the 19th century, the limited liability corporation became an established feature of the institutional landscape in a great many countries. That itself may have been the death knell of capitalism. It meant that corporations could undertake risky ventures, fail, stiff the creditors, and walk away with little damage to the organizers. In point of fact, the U.S. railroad system, the transcontinental railroads of the United States, were built on a financial system of that kind. The creditors in question were actually British investors in many cases. The railway companies that built the railways failed. The creditors didn't get their money back, and the organizers went on to organize the operating railways, which operated on the track that the British investors had conveniently financed. There's a long history of that kind of thing, and my point is that when we talk about government bailouts today, we sometimes forget that the great built-in bailout is the limited liability system of corporations, which makes it possible to do things of the kind that I just described. But there are many other candidates in the past for the death of capitalism, and many conservatives, of course, thought it was happening when pension systems were established in much of the industrialized world. Pension systems mean that people don't actually have to save for their retirement, that people who are worried about being able to eat next week don't have to be worried about, don't have to save to provide for their food when they reach 50, if they do reach 50. And this is another diminution of individual responsibility, parallel in a vague sense to the case of the limited liability corporation, which many advocates of some unknown or rather unrealized form of pure capitalism still object to. Or maybe it was when we decided to protect people against medicines that are actually poisonous and started to check in advance. Or maybe the death of capitalism really happened when we started to interfere with people's free choices about smoking cigarettes by putting on big taxes or making the tobacco companies disclose the health hazards of these things. Well, enough of these speculations about when the event actually occurred. I think capitalism is dead. It has died many times before. It has always been resurrected. It will be resurrected again. The serious point is that we have an opportunity now to try to design some economic institutions that do make better sense. And as we try to approach that task, it would really be helpful if we just stopped using all these ideological labels, realized what a complex world we now live in, and how badly we need carefully designed institutions to promote our economic welfare.